Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Adam Cherry. I'm the head of equity sales for the US in New York. We're happy to have with us today as our featured speaker, Dr. Roberto Borioni, a leading virologist based in Italy. Dr. Borioni is well known as having been very early in warning the world against the severity of this coronavirus. We're also fortunate today to have with us Dr. Paolo Shap, CEO of the Syrio-Lebanese Hospital in Sao Paulo. In addition, we have Chiagama Cruz, our head of healthcare and consumer research, and Mark Fenton, our head of sales for Europe and Asia. We will have some Q&A today, so please email your salesperson if you have any questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Borioni.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be your host, to be hosted by you and to be your guest. And my background is that I'm a medical doctor with a residency in clinical immunology, and I am professor of virology at one of the biggest Milan hospitals. So I've been in the eye of the storm of the coronavirus, and I'm currently in Milan, where we have a lockdown. So I'm here, and I'm talking to you from one of the hottest spots of the planet for this unfortunate infection. What happened in the past is very simple. This was a spillover, a virus that from the bat was spread to the humans, and so it became a human virus. It's a virus that is very contagious, a lot more than we could realize from the Chinese data. We realized here that the transmission of the infection is very, very easy and very, very frequent, more than what we expected. And that the respiratory syndrome, which is caused by this virus, is pretty severe, at least in older people, in people having comorbidities like obesity or high blood pressure, diabetes. And we see that it really has a huge impact in the healthcare system. And basically, the problem is that many patients are needing intensive care units, and they stay a long time in the intensive care unit. It's a matter of weeks and not of days, as for many other diseases. So the capacity of the health system to react and to be able to treat all these patients is somewhat critical. And let's say all the social distanciation measures are basically aimed to flatten the curve of the epidemic and putting the health system in a position to be able to cope with this hugely increased demand of intensive care units. In Italy, what happened in the north of Italy was that for sure the virus went undetected for a long time. We saw our first case on February 20. But the size of the infection was so huge at the beginning that for sure the virus has been circulating for many days or weeks before. And also the reaction has been not very, let's say, very prompt. We realized that there was an hotspot, in the Lodi city, in a small city in the north, and that was locked down. And also schools were closed in the northern part of Italy. But the general attitude of the population was not to be very careful, not to be, worried about the virus. Many took the opportunity of the school closure for going to ski resort places or going to the museum or, around. This was also helped, unfortunately, by the position of some health professionals that say, oh, it's just the flu. It only will go away in 20 days. And so they were hosted by a TV show. Politicians were, going ahead with the hashtag Milano non si ferma, you don't stop Milan. They were just, going around drinking with aperitivo. This was a deadly mixture of irresponsible behavior that we paid very dearly in the following weeks. Because really there was a moment that the health system of the northern part of Italy, which is a very good health system in general, was really overwhelmed by the infection. After, let's say, more than 1 month of lockdown, things are a little bit improving. But the problem that we are facing is that the numbers that are released by the government have nothing to do with the severity of the infection, because as a matter of fact, a huge part of patients that are infected by coronavirus, they don't get diagnosed. Personally, as a doctor, I have at least 30 people that I'm following by phone, and they have coronavirus, but they didn't receive any formal diagnosis of coronavirus. So the numbers that we have are not a reliable indicator of how things are going. What I think can be, a good sign is that hospital accesses to the emergency departments are greatly decreased. And also the occupancy of intensive care unit beds has been lowered in the last, let's say, two weeks. So we are facing this emergency. We have started to know this virus, and the disease caused by this virus, which is, as you well know, mainly a respiratory disease, which is affecting the lower part of the respiratory tree, giving problems of, respiratory, insufficiency, because patients cannot oxygenate their blood enough. And what has been pretty dangerous was the, let's say, entrance of this virus, the arrival of this virus into, let's say, protected residences that are for elderly people or disabled people. There really, it was a carnage, because in some places, 25% of the people hosted in these facilities died from coronavirus. So, I mean, we have to learn it the hard way that it's very important to protect this kind of sites that are, occupied by people that are, sort of more vulnerable to the infection. Moreover, here in Italy, we had a very bad death toll, which is once again a lot worse than what is told by the official numbers, because the feeling is that many deaths went undiagnosed because they simply died at home, being old people, and they didn't go to the hospital. Because if we compare the death rate, the average deaths in the previous years, if we compare with the death that we had in the March of this 2020, we see that in some part of Italy, you have to multiply the number of deaths by a factor of 3 or 4, which is pretty frightful. If you see, there was a very, very bad thing in general, because it really killed a lot of people in a certain age group. What we are seeing now, I think, has been remarkable, besides general question, is that this disease is putting a lot of pressure on healthcare structures, and also is putting a lot of pressure on healthcare professionals. You need to have, doctors and nurses and all other technicians that are working in a hospital being protected, because the number of let's say, health officials that were infected by this virus was very, very high. And the reason is simple, because they were not prepared. We didn't have enough, individual protection, devices, like, mask and, let's say, glasses and screens and gloves and disposable gowns. So we experienced that it's very important to have a good supply of all these pretty simple equipments, but that they were not available because somewhat, I think it's difficult to explain why, because really the reason the thing was expected, but we at the very beginning were not very ready, I think, as a nation to react properly. Now we are trying to restart. I'm working with many Italian companies that are trying to reopen in these days, and the first one that we expect to open is Ferrari, the automaker I'm collaborating with. They have a very ambitious plan of, healthcare for their workers, and this should allow to restart in safety the production of the cars. And some other companies are trying to move on, and I think we will have to live with this kind of new, let's say, cohabitants of this roommate that will be in Italy and in all the world. But I think in the long term, I'm positive, because I think that at the very end, we will not stop. We will change a little bit our habits, and things will go ahead as they used to go. When we had tuberculosis, the world didn't stop, and we will not stop now. So I don't know if there is something. I mean, this is a general thing that I said, as a general outline of what's happening in Italy, and I think that it would be more interesting to share, my thought with you upon your question that I'm very happy to receive. So please go ahead.
Well, may I, Professor Baroni? It's can you hear me?
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry, Professor Baroni. I know, as you just mentioned about Ferrari. I mean, as we've seen, the Spanish started implementing strategies to go back to work, and other smaller European countries. As Italy and the Italian government starts to talk about, renewing strategies to go back into the workplace, how do you see the risk of a second wave of infections and the impact, generally on the health system there in Italy? Because obviously there is a fear of an inflection rate of the population running around 10 to 15%. What is your view about that?
Well, I think that, factories can start in reasonable safety because, it's a controlled population. And probably also what you can do is to, let not let re-enter the facilities all the older people or, people that are sick. They are more vulnerable than others. In general, I think that we are facing a very, let's say, it's a new time. It's difficult to foresee what will happen because, we were just in the middle of a storm, and the storm just now is calming down, and we will need to go back to sort of, normal life. So first of all, I think that, to use the mask will be a new habit, like I'm wearing, glasses or I'm wearing, shoes. To wear a mask will be for sure something that will be needed for this in the short time. And I think a very huge question mark is related to to what the weather will do to the transmission of this virus. All respiratory virus that we have in the earth are suffering a lower rate of transmission during the summer. And so will this be an exception? We don't know it. All other coronavirus are transmitted a lot less during the summer. And so should this be the case for this new coronavirus, this could help us even as a window, or, for a better organization with a lower contagion rate. And hopefully something will come out, from the, let's say, drugs and medical point of view, increasing the capacity of the diagnostic capacity, and also increasing the treatments that can be put in place for treating people. Now we are really lacking evidence of any utility of the effectiveness of any drugs, but many trials are ongoing. So hopefully in a few weeks we will know something more, what to do, what not to do. And already we are knowing a lot better this disease. So the rate of treatment is increasing because in the hospital they get used to treat these patients, they know them better, they know how to care for them. So I think we are really in a ground zero situation now, and think we will improve from now on. And the possibility of a second wave, that's important. We will need to be ready. I mean, the lockdown works if you do it early. So in the future, we will need to monitor the situation. And where an outbreak comes out, immediately shut down everything in that part of the country, and then control, trace, and isolate. That's only tool we have. So I think we will be able to restart, but with a great attention for having the possibility of a very prompt lockdown. We have learned the lessons that, here in Italy, we had basically three places at the beginning. One was Lodi, shut down, and the situation improved. Another one was in Veneto. Euganeo, a small city, a very strong lockdown, it worked. Now there are 0 cases. But the third places where there were cases was near Brescia. It's a very active, industrial part of Italy. And they were a little bit, worried about closing it down, shutting it down, because it's a very important productive part of the country. They did not shut down immediately, and that was really a disaster. So I think the lesson is that you need a very quick lockdown, and the earlier you do it, the shorter can be the lockdown. So I think that what we learn is that an early action is good for both economy and for the health of the citizens.
Thank you.
I think it would be interesting to hear from Dr. Shabshab if he has any questions. Yeah. I'm sure you have a ton of them.
I do have. Hi, Dr. Bariani. Thank you for coming to our call here.
It's a pleasure.
Are you basing your return strategy on the herd immunity that you gained through this period of contagious?
Well, herd immunity is a concept that is difficult to implement without a vaccine. There is not a single virus that just disappeared on the basis of herd immunity. I mean, if you let the virus go, it will infect all the population, and it will become endemic, like measles or like anything else that you can make it disappear only with a vaccine. In this specific case, estimates in Italy are that the number of cases, real cases, is around 10% of the population. But this is very high on a sense, but this is very small in the sense that you think that 90% of the population is still susceptible to the infection. So I think that in the long run, for sure, herd immunity will play a part. But I hope that the vaccine will come before and giving us a tool to produce an immunity. At the moment, I think that we are starting in these very days to understand how serology can be useful. Really, we are starting to understand it now. But now, I mean, in the last 5 or 6 days, because we have reliable tests here in Italy. They've been developed by an Italian company, which is Diasorin, and we are starting to use them now. And I hope that this will be useful for understanding more about the dynamic of the infection that at the moment we don't know, if not by very rough number.
Joe, just to explain to the audience, the people that already contacted the virus and had the disease, are they going to become immune? Or do you think that those antibodies that they develop and that you're going to be testing by serology are not protecting antibodies?
We don't know, because only time will tell, because the only way we can know if people who recover are protected or not is to follow them during time. We had the first case here in Italy, February 20, so it's not enough to make any assumption. But there is a but. We can make an educated guess. All the infectious diseases caused by virus to the respiratory tract are giving a certain degree of protections. Not always the protection is, lasting for all the lifetime, but there is no case of complete lack of protections. In the worst case, the protection is partial, and in any case, other, infections are a lot milder than the first one. So I think that, we don't know for this, but hoping this will not be the only exception to the rule, we can assume that a certain degree of protection will be provided by the recovery, but from the infection, and so we hope that immunity will be important in decrease the spread of the virus. Because the moment you know that somebody is partially protected, not protected, you can put this person in like, for example, in the medical care or in the front office of a company. You can expose these people without risk for them and for the others, because they should not be infected. But once again, only time will tell. What I would like to point out that some game changers that could arrive, and I think this is very relevant also from the, let's say, economical point of view, from business point of view. We are seeing some already existing drugs that are very promising in the laboratory. And for example, one of them is hydroxyquinoline. That's an anti-malarial drug, very old drug. And in the lab, in the virology laboratory, it works very well in a prophylactic way. Should this work in the clinical trial? We have no proof at the moment. This would have the potential of changing really the situation, because a prophylactic drug that could decrease the infection rate and could decrease the infectivity of the asymptomatic people, which is the major problem, because asymptomatic, virus spreader are now the hugest problem for us. This could really change the game. And you can imagine also a huge demand of such a drug, should this be confirmed by generic drug makers, because all the world will need it. And, you know, considering it's an old drug, it's easy to produce, it's easy to provide. I think that this, I would keep an eye on generic drug makers, because they could play a role which is very important. Once again, there are other drugs which are now studied and clinical trials are ongoing, like tocilizumab, and this compound is a Roche compound, which is used on rheumatic arthritis, slowing down inflammations where there are conditions, where inflammation is the problem. Also, this drug is a biologic, but it's very close to the expiration of the patent. I wouldn't be surprised if, the patent would be, let's say, released by the company, because I don't think at this moment you can maintain a patent on this. But should they do that, production of human monoclonal antibody will raise up. And so I would keep an eye on companies who are able to produce human biologicals, let's say in a general terms, because if one of these drugs turns out to be useful, you will see the demand that ramp up in an incredible way.
Doctor, there's an ongoing discussion of an Israeli company which seems to be about to launch a human vaccine for coronavirus 19, and this is a public discussion that I think it's taking the news everywhere. What's your expectation for a timeline for the vaccine for humans to be ready, and how long would it take to roll out from a global standpoint?
Well, we, at least in Italy, on a daily basis, we have a new vaccine which is working on a daily basis. And this is not surprising, because to set up a vaccine is not particularly difficult. The problem is that then you have to show that it works, which is a little bit more difficult. So how is usually developed the vaccine? You set it up in the lab, you try in mice, in cats, everywhere you want, and you end up with a good compound that shows that is able in an animal model to produce a reasonable response, immune response against the virus. And this is the place where we are now with many vaccines, not only the Israeli, but also the Oxford one, the one from the University of Pittsburgh. We have many vaccines that are good candidates. Now, what do you do usually for deciding if the vaccine works? That's the problem, because the way traditionally we look at the vaccine efficacy is to make a perspective study where you take, let's say, 6,000 people, you vaccinate 3,000 people, you don't vaccinate 3,000 people, and they just, they keep on with their, usual life. They work possibly in a risk situation, like, for example, health officials, and then you wait and you count the infected people. You count the infected people in the vaccinated group, and you count the infected people in the non-vaccinated group. Hopefully, you find that all the infected people are in the group where you didn't use the vaccine, and so you say the vaccine works. What the problem with this study? That it takes a long time, years usually. So this is the problem. And this is why, from a theoretical standpoint, the timeline for a vaccine is pretty slow. But there is a huge but here to be discussed, because somebody's thinking that, considering the fact that the infection is not so dangerous in young people, somebody's thinking to speculate if there is the ethical base for making an experimental infection, which is completely different situation. Because in this case, you take 100 people, you vaccinate young, healthy, expected not to suffer serious consequences by the infection. Then you vaccinate 50 of them. You don't vaccinate the other 50. You have 100, and then you infect them. And you can have in a couple of months the results that you could have in, let's say, 2 or 3 years. This could be a really game changer, because in this situation, you could speed up at the cost of more risk for the people participating to the study. You can speed up incredibly the time needed for a proof of concept of a vaccine. And then so I think if this assumption is made, and I personally think it will be made, because I think that the feeling, there was a paper on Nature a couple of days ago. There was another paper on Journal of Experimental Medicine. I think that this kind of experimental infections have been done already in the past. For example, have been done for common cold. They've been done for influenza. They've been done for malaria. And I think that the feeling is that we are such an emergency that we should a little bit loosen the rules for supreme interest, which is to have a vaccine as soon as we can, because I'm sure the day after a vaccine will be available, we'll go back to our normal life in 1 second. It will be, even better than before, in my opinion, because we will have more enthusiasm. Because
the thing is, it would be easier to run. It would be easier to run the experiment if we find the drug to couple with it. Treatment, an efficient treatment.
Treatment is easier. Treatment is easier because you're treating sick people. So if you take somebody who's sick, you accept to take a risk, because anyway, somebody who's sick, who's infected by coronavirus, is already under a risk of dying, or at least being very sick, and then even if recovering at the very end. The problem with the vaccine is that you have to administer it to healthy people. So
I understand that. The thing is, it would be easier to separate a group of people, to infect them on purpose to see if the vaccine is working or not. If we had a drug treatment for them, to avoid them going to the ICU and risking their lives.
In my opinion, even the current status, it would be accepted. I'm convinced that, in the current status, not treatment, it would be accepted to run such a test on young people. Under 30, you see very rarely complications. So really, it's really, I would say personally, but that's a personal opinion. It's not a scientific opinion, but I would say that, if I were in an ethical committee, I would say that after proper selection of the candidates that shouldn't be, not more than 25 years old, let's say 30 years old, I would say that this would be acceptable. And once again, also protection studies with drug in the same way could be performed if the things just is accepted.
Doctor, one of the things that we read down here was that during the Spanish flu situation 100 years ago, we had several different peaks of infection. I think it was depending on the place, it was like 3 different specific peaks of infection. Do you think that this is a likely scenario for the coronavirus situation today? That's my first question. Do you think it's avoidable to have something like that? And I'm very curious to understand why there is such a mismatch between what's happening in New York, Italy, and Spain, and what happened in a country like Germany, for instance. Why is there such a mismatch of the consequences of this virus?
Well, I'm afraid that the mismatch is in the way they count, diseased people, because the health system of, I don't know well the health system of Spain, but we really compare the health system of Italy and the health system of Germany are comparable, because many Italian doctors, they work there, so there is a continuous exchange of doctors between the two systems. In Germany, for sure, in Italy we are suffering something peculiar, which is we have a lot of old people, and the aged people in Italy, they have a very active life. They go out, they play cards, they go to dance. Really, they are very active. This is something which is particular in Italy. And not only, they help very often their sons, like babysitting nephews, or just helping in working, and so they are very active. This was very bad because the infection age was very high in Italy. If you compare the infectious rate, the median age of infection in Germany and Italy, you find that in Italy the infection age is a lot higher, and this explains a higher mortality. But I think that one of the problems is that the fact that the number of cases in Italy is hugely underestimated. Hugely underestimated. There is an Imperial College estimate that number, calculated March 28, something around 10% of the population already infected. And I'm sure that this is a conservative estimate, because I think that in the north we are well above that number. And at this point, if there is a certain degree of protection which is provided by the infection, this could be relevant in this part of Italy that has been hit particularly hardly by the infection, because this could, at the very end of the story, after a tragedy, this could turn out to be an advantage, because if you have more people that have been infected, you have more people that now are somewhat protected.
Doctor, if I may, just to follow up on one thing you said, we got a question from a client. I'll just read it. Could you share how much of the pressure on the health system came from the high proportion of the elderly in Italy? If you could speak to that.
The majority of the pressure on the health system was by elderly people. I would say that the majority. So an absolute priority in handling such a crisis is keeping the virus away from the housing. We have this kind of, we call it residenze sociali assistite, something of social housing for very old people and disabled people. Death toll in this structure was very bad, and on the other hand, people entering the intensive care units, which has been the critical point from this group of people, has been very, very high. So the majority of cases that require intensive care unit was for people, let's say, above 70.
Doctor, go ahead, Mark, please.
Are you sure? Okay. I was just going to ask three short fire questions. One, how do you see the reaction of the world leaders, and their different response times? What do you think? Do you think they were in line with proper response times given what was happening in Italy, or do you think they were late? The second question, what do you think, and why do you think, in your opinion, whether the WTO were too slow to pull the trigger? Because you was talking about this and highlighting this in Italy earlier in the year, late January, early February, and obviously WTO were, pretty slow on the uptake. And the third question, a very short question, what do you see the biggest risk going forward? Because now we are looking at ending quarantine and lockdown in countries, as you spoke about at the very beginning. But looking forward, do you think some will be doing this too fast? Because I personally agree with you that the actual numbers and the spread is much greater than what we actually see in any of the numbers, and how countries calculate numbers is very different from one to the next.
Yeah. So first of all, the leaders. I personally was very surprised from Italy to see how slow were other countries to react, because data from China, and we will talk about that later, were really cloudy. We couldn't understand well what was going on, because China, you cannot discuss freely about an issue. Now I can tell you what I want and I don't get arrested. This is not the case in China. So I think, you can imagine that China is something different, but Italy, it's a country like Germany, like Spain, like, it's a Western democracy. So, we make mistakes like everybody can, but, we have a free press, we have a free opinion, so a public opinion. And I was really surprised when the virus was raging in Italy already. Nothing was done by other countries. They were standing and watching. And even now, there are some leaders that are denying the fact. But this is very dangerous, because the very end of the story, reality comes up, and we have the lesson of when the head of South Africa decided that HIV was not the cause of AIDS, and the death toll was of more than 300,000 of people. And so I see really that some deniers are really surprisingly, present in the in the Western countries. Also, my personal opinion, but that's my personal opinion because we are out of science now, is that WHO was incredibly slow. I can remember perfectly on January 21st, I remember the date, I got a radio interview, and in the morning, the interview was at 12, and in the morning at 10 a.m., the European Center for Disease Control issued a warning saying, we see very unlikely the arrival of the virus in Europe. They literally say this, we see very unlikely. And I remember that I say that my host, my radio host was reading me this statement, and I say, I mean, I hope that I'm wrong, but I think that that's not the case. I mean, the virus will arrive, and I've been really fighting for quarantining people from China. It was very simple because the virus was there. It was very easy to stop the virus at the very beginning, but nothing was done. And WHO, in my opinion, was incredibly slow. I think it declared a pandemic state just after the pandemic was obviously in place. It's like, that you tell somebody to slow down after the accident. It's completely useless. So I think that this is a lesson that we should learn, that, this kind of, politics, I think, plays a huge role in these international agencies. And we have to be a lot quicker in the future. We can't wait, we can't wait them. I think that the danger of the future is a new wave, new outbreaks, and but we know now how we have to handle them quick, and very aggressively, because that's the only way. Until we will have a vaccine or a therapy or something slowing down the virus, we have to rely on this medieval quarantine. I think it was in 14th centuries, implemented by Venice Republic, and that's what we have to do: trace, test, trace, and mainly isolate people. That will be, but to do it quickly. We can't wait. We can't wait, last 3, 4, 5 days. We can't wait 15 days like we did in Italy at the very beginning. We have to act very quickly. There is a huge scientific evidence that lockdown works very well if it's implemented very strictly and very quickly and very early in the emergence of a new outbreak.
Dr. Buriani, could you detail your return plans for the industries, for Ferrari and other industries? And the second question at this moment is, would you say that face masks for the whole population that have to be going out at this point is a must for preventing the second wave?
What we are learning now is that, the major surprise from my point of view is the amount of contagion which is due by asymptomatic people. That's really surprising. Really, from the very beginning, I've been fighting with WHO, was claiming once again that asymptomatic contagion was not existing, but the numbers are really at least impossible to imagine. I have to be sincere. I was convinced that asymptomatic people was playing a role in the spread of the disease, but not at this size. Recent data from two New York hospitals just measured the number of positive women attending the hospital for pregnancy. 13.5% of them were asymptomatic and were, infected by the virus. So I think that the correct assumption is that we have to consider that everybody is contagious. So this means that everybody, we always claim that, face masks are only for the sick people. And also WHO now at this moment, still once again, WHO is still discussing about the opportunity of using a widespread use of face masks, but there's really something which is not to be discussed anymore. Face mask for all the, surgical face mask, I'm saying simple face mask, disposable face masks are needed for all the population. You have to go out like you go out with shoes because you can cut your feet. You have to go out with mask because if everybody is wearing a mask, this will be a huge blow to the diffusion of the virus. I think that's at the moment is the most important thing. Face mask and not being close to other people. So personally, I'm a little bit not very optimistic about the, let's say, restaurants, theaters, concert. This will be, in my opinion, a little bit slow to restart, while all the rest will go, because you can
The thing is, we were slow to start prescribing face masks, the surgical ones, because we know they're going to be lacking for the healthcare professionals here in Brazil.
Yeah.
What would you say about the cloth masks, the house-made or handmade cloth masks?
Well, cloth masks are very reproducible, because every mask is different from the other. So it's better than nothing, but it's not the optimal situation. As a matter of fact, producing mask is not so difficult, because there are machineries that could produce a lot of masks. So I think that one of the tasks that the government should take is to be sure that there are enough face masks for everybody. I mean, this is you can be surprised at the beginning, but now we know, and we know that we will need a lot of face masks. So we're talking about rockets. We are talking about face masks, something which is very simple to produce. Production can be automated, and it's very expensive and very simple. I have friends that were doing something else. They're responding to this huge demand for face masks. They just bought the machinery for doing the face mask, and they can be done in a huge number at a reasonable cost with a profit. So I think
I know, but we are developing it. We are developing our capabilities in
the meantime, you should use what you have. Cloth mask is better than nothing, but I think that the aim would be to imagine a widespread use of face mask, surgical face mask. And I think that the priority should be to be able to produce what's needed in your country. That's my opinion.
Just to enlighten our audience, you would have to change the face mask, the surgical face mask. The material is TNT, and you'd have to. You can't use only one for the whole day, because they become wet, and you just have to discard it and use another one. So when you think a whole population in Brazil, we are talking about 210 million people using when they have to go out, and that's I have to be very clear at this moment, when they must go out, they should wear a mask, and if you don't have the surgical mask to wear, you should wear a cloth mask. And you have to prepare the country to produce enough surgical face masks so you can have it for all the population in the future. That's my point here.
The companies I've been working with for reopening, some of them, they simply bought a company making face masks, and because all the workers, they will need to wear a face mask the moment they go out from their home, and they will change the mask after 4 hours. It's an 8-hour shift in Italy, so they come with a mask. When they eat, they just throw away the mask they've been using for the morning or for the first part of their shift, and then they will have a second mask, and they will use the mask until they arrive home. So they will always have a mask.
Doctor, we've been relying extensively on the PCR testing as the most efficient tool, but it's not that efficient when it comes to the time for the diagnostic to be made. It takes like 2-3 days. At the same time, serology has been used here in Brazil, but we have 40% false negatives. What sort of new technology are you envisaging for COVID testing, and do you think this could be produced in a mass scale?
Well, PCR, or let's say PCR, nucleic acid amplification or demonstration techniques, they are very reliable, but they are slow. But new techniques are coming out, and I would like to point you out 2 major advances that could really change the game. First, Abbott came out with the ID Now system, which was used by pediatricians for diagnosing streptococcal infection. They adapted it to coronavirus. It looks like it works very well, and this can be performed in 15 minutes with a very small apparatus that you can have in your office. Also, there is an important, advancing, which seems to be stupid, but it's not stupid at all, that FDA approved the test that could use not a swab, but simply saliva. And this changes the game because you don't need a health official, you don't need a doctor or a nurse to take a swab, exposing himself to risk. So I think that, in my opinion, there will be a big push in the development of tests that will be for demonstration of the virus, that will be inexpensive, that will be fast, that will be easy to perform. And this obviously will change the game, because if you can screen easily the population, you will block easily, easier, in an easier way, the spread of the virus. From the serological point of view, we have new tests now coming out. They seem to be more accurate. They seem to be cheaper. An Italian company came out yesterday, with 2 days ago, I think, or 3 days ago, with a new test, the Asorin, that is $5, €4, basically. $4 more or less, and can be performed in something like around half an hour. This cannot be in the doctor's office, but once again could be of great help in serological studies. What's the meaning of a serological positivity, we still don't know, but we will know very early, in my opinion, in the future.
Doctor, you've mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that maybe the summer can help you out in Italy through diminishing transmission of this virus.
Yeah, that's what, this is possible. We still don't know, but we hope this. We hope this.
My question would be, we've seen countries like Qatar and places where the air is super dry and warm, dealing with a significant amount of disease spreading. Do you think that your initial thought is that this is going to help, or it's at this point just hoping that this is going to be
really? I mean, the transmission of the virus, depending on the weather, is something we really don't know. Because, for example, you saw influenza in Italy or in the Western countries. It arrives usually January 15, then it rages on until March 15, then disappears. In 3 weeks, it goes away. Why? We don't know. It's probably a mixture of, humidity, of temperature. I don't know. And in Italy and let's say in the Western countries, but mainly in the Mediterranean countries like Italy, France, and Spain, the spread of respiratory infection drops down dramatically in the summer. This includes other coronavirus infections that account for something like 15% of the common cold, because other coronaviruses are circulating in the population. So, I mean, this could be the exception, but we hope it will not be. But this is just speculation. We hope this will go like the
other. Dr. Borioni, you're very much a leader, from what I've read, in the stand against the anti-vaccination movement.
Old times.
Yes. We have to look at some good that comes out of this terrible situation that we're in. Does this put a huge dent in the anti-vaccination movement? How do you see it changing going forward? Does this do anything to that? Thank you.
I think this is a huge change, because, this is something that really was hitting our lives in a way that was unexpected and unthinkable just, 2 months before. And the basis of the anti-vaccination, propaganda was that nobody knew, and nobody remembered what was the meaning of a deadly virus without a vaccine, which was like polio. But polio disappeared at the end of the 50s. So people of my age, I'm 57, never heard of polio, because this was a part of my life. I think now we wanted, this is the world without a vaccine, that we are locked in our home, that we can't live anymore the way we were. And the moment the vaccine will arrive, we will be sort of liberated. We'll go back to our normal life. So I think this is over. The anti-scientific, say, will be my opinion.
Just
dried up.
If I just may ask, just following Adam's question there, because I was reading some reports, some data the weekend, and I was personally, living here in the UK, quite startled to see some of the percentages, not just here in the UK, but the percentage of populations that are in favour of vaccination. I mean, one of the startling figures in the whole of Europe is in the Netherlands, because I think 75% of the population are in favour. Somewhere like Italy, I think, was less than 40%, around 38%. You know, the UK is less than 50%. Spain. I mean, is there a huge political element behind this in driving governments as well? Because, you know, if you've got a government like in, again, take the Netherlands, 75% of the population want vaccine. Obviously, that must have an impact on the political leadership of a government. Are you with me?
Yeah, in Italy, we had you know, a part of the government which was very close to the anti-vaccination movement, and today I've been. I don't know how do you call it when there is a member of the parliament, you know, raising up and making a claim. You know, there is a claim against me today personally, because they said that I want to make a new vaccine, that, you know, a vaccine for coronavirus, that, you know, this vaccine will be made with Nazi techniques. That's what I just explained you, and that the Italian government should refuse to buy such a vaccine, which, you know, now I think that it is not very, very popular, such a discussion, because nobody would refuse a vaccine. We are trying to have one. We pray to have one as soon as possible. So I think that this will put, you know, the science at the center of village. You know, we have been living a period where, you know, competence and, you know, study and being expert was sort of, you know, something which was not viewed with a very good attitude by the public. I think we are back to the point where science is very important and is what's saving your life. I mean, homeopathy, you know, all the other pseudoscience have been very quiet in the last 2 months in Italy. I think that, in my opinion, the discussion on these issues is over.
Thank you, Dr. Bruni. We're starting to wind down in time, and I'd like to take advantage of the fact that we do have Dr. Shapshap here. So a general question for you, as I think the listeners would want to hear, just general questions at your hospital. How are things going? Have the admissions been going up, going down, staying the same? How is your capacity with ICU beds? If you could talk a little bit about the situation in Brazil.
Yeah, first of all, we have to explain, Dr. Buriani, that in Brazil we have two different situations, unfortunately, because of the inequalities. So we have one population that has access to the private hospitals we run, and the one other part of the population has access to the public hospitals we run, because we also run public hospitals. We manage public hospitals that are open for everybody, free of charge. In the population that has access to the private hospital, so it's the higher level, less vulnerable part of our population, the disease is controlled right now. So we have the same numbers. We are not going up, and we have data from other hospitals in the same level of access here in São Paulo. So I'm talking about São Paulo, and I'm talking about the classes A and B, and it's apparently controlled, and it's been controlled for the last 2 weeks, roughly. And so we're either decreasing the number of cases at Sírio-Libanês Hospital, the one that I run. The peak of patients admitted here at the same time was 120 occupancy, or 120 patients occupancy for the coronavirus patients, and it's coming down. It's close to 80 right now. So we have to stick to the social distancing to have a flat curve here and be able to deal with those patients. The other situation is for the public patients or the public system of health in Brazil, and it's going up. It's going up here in São Paulo. We're using more and more beds for those patients. We are still able to provide good care for the patients of the public system, but we have to stick to the lockdown to be able to provide good care. There's a huge difference in mortality rate or lethality rate when you have good assistance and when
Yeah,
you
that's
not
huge,
have
really. Absolutely, that's
good
correct.
assistance.
That's
You can
correct. I
triple
mean, yeah.
the rate of mortality if you
A
don't have
good
a
ICU care, it makes a huge difference. And I mean, my hospital, we were really at a certain point overwhelmed. We have to shut down all the surgery, non-emergency surgery, for converting all the operating rooms into intensive care unit beds. We acquired new ventilators at a certain point, thanks to a public crowdfunding that I supported. We were able to convert our basketball court. We had an indoor basketball court for the university students, and this was converted in a 40-bed intensive care unit, which was dedicated to COVID-19 exclusively. So, I mean, the pressure at a certain point was very high. But 15 days from now, the number of emergency, department access really dropped down. I mean, in the most terrible days, there were 70, 80 a day. Now we are to 7, 8, 10. So what I would say from our experience, the effect of the lockdown takes place after 20 days. It takes 20 days of lockdown to start to see a decrease a strong decrease. So, I mean, this is a little bit frustrating because there is a huge effort to stay locked at your home and still you see the cases going up. But that's important. This is why it's important to share the experience and to tell that, it takes time to see the effects. But there are huge effects at the very end of the story. Because I think that, the calculation was that the lockdown in Italy saved something like between 30,000 and 40,000 lives. I think that if you could implement it before and quicker and stronger, it could be even better. So I think this is a lesson that we know for the restart. We will start again with cases drop down, but we have to be really, 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 really alert. We have to be in a high alert because should the disease start again in new outbreaks, we will need to be extremely, extremely aggressive, just to shut down immediately with no hesitation. There is no room for hesitation in this disease because in this situation, because the virus is too contagious to wait. You can't wait.
Dr. Boriani and I, we have to be very clear with you guys. What he just said, we have a silent period in between contamination and disease, and it's going from 14 days to 21 days. So it's a 3-week period. Anything you do now will reflect in 21 days, for good and for bad. So if you lock down, you're going to have the
for good and for
benefit.
bad. That's very important. For good and for bad, because we had a terrible period. Because there was a the emergency was really downplayed. What Dr. Chacha said is absolutely correct. The good and the bad comes 20 days after what you do.
It sounds like terrific advice. Go ahead, Tiago.
No, I had one last question. I mean, Doctor, we've seen a lot of pseudoscience on the course of the last 2 months, and this is something that we try to battle every day. We try to stick to what it's actually proved. And one of the discussions that we've seen over the last few days is regarding the BCG vaccine, that countries that had public BCG vaccines programs were not being affected to the same extent as those which don't have that sort of program. Do you see any science in that? Have you seen this discussion? Is this something that you're monitoring?
I think that there is a point that we have to make. Correlation is not causation. So, because, the disease started in China, and you can imagine, that the disease was hitting harder, the very beginning people of, Asiatic origin, which is not true. And I think that we have to keep our mind open, but we have to require strong evidence for any assumption we make. At the moment, there is no evidence that BCG is protecting that pneumococcus vaccination is protecting the childhood vaccinations are protecting. I'm sure that we will see that something is protecting in the long run, and at that point we will be able to implement that thing. But we have to be careful because you don't know if something can be useful or detrimental until you have at least initial clinical data from a controlled study. I mean, use of chloroquine, for example, very widespread use of chloroquine, I see it very inappropriate, because at the moment we don't have a strong evidence about the efficacy, and you know, the efficacy is uncertain while the side effects are certain, and so I think we should be very cautious. I mean, we have to wait, and the lockdown buys time that we need to use properly for a clinical trial, for proper, you know, for making masks, for providing, you know, more beds in ICU, and for, you know, making COVID hospitals that we will need to have, like once we used to have in Italy, tuberculosis hospital. They were called sanatorium. I don't know if you had that in other countries, but we used to have tuberculosis hospital, and we will need to have coronavirus hospital in the same way. And so time that we are buying with the lockdown has to be used this way.
Interesting.
Anxiety and wishful thinking is not a good guidance for treatment. We we understand anxiety, we understand risk, we understand fear, but we cannot be guided by it. We have to be guided by science, and we are buying time, and we are going to have the answers through science.
That's correct. That's correct. I'm sure we will very soon. I say I'm confident that, you know, news will arrive very soon, in my opinion, because clinical trials are underway, and if something works, we will know it very quickly.
Excellent. Excellent. Any other? I mean, it sounded like final statements, but any final words of wisdom for the participants of this call?
Well, I thank you. It's been really a pleasure for me to be able to confront myself with you and with a colleague, sharing, you know, my experience. And please feel free to, you know, just, you know, if there's anything can be helpful. Let's hope that very quickly we will have, you know, we will have very good news. But my final thought is this: you know, world has not been stopped by tuberculosis. World has not been stopped by polio. World has not been stopped by smallpox in the old times. And I'm convinced that, you know, we will not be stopped by this virus. I mean, now we are frightened, but, you know, on one hand, we will have better treatments and better prevention. On the other hand, we will, you know, get used to more risk in the daily life. And I think at the very end of the story, life will just restart in a very similar way than before, as is always did, you know, after wars, after anything. That's my personal opinion.
I have a final word, and my final word is going to our sponsors, Dr. Roberto Briani. Itaú is doing a great job here in Brazil by providing endowment for the development of the mitigation of the disease through science, through experts, and we've been very proud of being part of these efforts. And again, take care of yourselves, protect yourselves, base your actions in information, science, and information, and we are going to be closer to the return to the new normal, not the same normal, but a new normal of social life that we are going to have, and we're going to enjoy it anyway. Thank you for the opportunity of clarifying some aspects of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Borioni and Dr. Shapshap, we thank you very much for your time, your thoughts, your words of wisdom. We appreciate it. We also appreciate all the hard work that you and the doctors that you work with are doing on the front lines to help the people that are afflicted with this and prevent those that are healthy from getting it. So we thank you for participating, and we thank you for your hard work. Also, thank you, Thiago and Mark. And with that, we'll conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.